They say a life can change in a day, but some days split a life clean through, like a log under an axe, and both halves keep on breathing. Mine was a Tuesday that smelled like wet leaves and motor oil. The screen door coughed when it shut behind my father. His boots went down the steps, and his truck idled like it was thinking things over before it obeyed. I watched his taillights stitch a red seam along the road. By the time the curve swallowed him, I knew he wasn't coming back. Mama stood on the porch in her house dress, with the tiny blue flowers faded from too much sun. She had a dish towel in her hands, wringing it slow like a prayer she didn't want to say out loud. On the kitchen table he left two things: a letter with no envelope, and a box of screws for the fence that leaned like it too was thinking of leaving. Mama slid the letter under the sugar jar and told me, "Finish your homework." Baby, I learned then that sometimes telling a child to do math is the kindest way to stop her from drowning. Our house grew quieter by the minute. Not the good quiet that comes with naps and Sunday afternoons, but the kind that presses on your chest and asks for rent. Boomer, our dog, kept nosing the door, listening for the whistle my father always gave when he wanted company. I tapped my pencil on my times tables and tried to remember what 10 times 10 felt like before numbers learned how to hurt. We ate soup that night. Mama set 2 bowls on the table and put one at his place like a ritual you respect even when you stop believing. After dinner, she washed both bowls, dried both bowls, and stacked both bowls away. We did not open the letter. Not then. Some doors you only open when the night is very dark and the crickets are loud enough to carry whatever you let go. At 2 in the morning, I woke to the sigh of the back door and found her on the porch with the letter open on her lap. The paper shivered in her hands. "He says he's sorry," she told me without looking up. "He says he needs to find himself." I was 9 years old and knew that people who wanted to find themselves rarely searched in kitchens where the coffee is cheap but honest. The next morning, she braided my hair-tight armor for school. We learned the bus route because the pickup left with him. At the stop, Miss Carroll said, "Heard," and Mama stood straight as a fence post and smiled that small, good smile that tells wolves there's another wolf inside the house. I sat by the window and counted mailboxes to stop the tears. Some mailboxes, I decided, held bills, the kind of pain you could pay down while. Others hid envelopes just like ours, folded under sugar like a mistake you want to weigh down with sweetness. We became a team you couldn't see but could feel. I swept floors and learned to fix squeaks and leaks. Mama took the night shift at Alvarez Diner, and the smell of hash browns in her hair became proof we were still alive. We sold the mower. I used his box of screws to straighten the fence. Every twist of my wrist sank a promise into cedar. Mama watched from the window and tapped the glass twice like applause you give a performer who needs silence more than clapping. Around us, the town did what towns do, pretended not to stare, and then brought casseroles. The pastor said the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. I didn't like the sound of that. It made God a traitor at a swap meet. Later, when I was older, I learned that what the Lord mostly gives is other people who will stand on your porch with a pan and say, "I made too much." That is how heaven calls sometimes through Tupperware with someone else's name written on masking tape. I learned numbers again. Not the ones in books, but the ones in bones. Hours until rent, cans until payday, miles until the tires sigh too loud and you have to listen. I learned another lesson too. If a person leaves, you gather tools. Grief is a plant with big leaves that blocks the light. Tools are the pruning shears. I carried a wrench in my backpack next to my reader and a list of phone numbers in 2 places, because redundancy can save your life. School became a refuge made of paper. I shelved books in the library and found a woman named Mrs. Finch who handed me silence like a blanket. She slipped college catalogs onto the desk like a person leaving breadcrumbs for a child she knows is smart enough to notice. Each page smelled like possibility and ink. I didn't circle anything then. I just breathed near the pages. At home, we wrote a rule on a sticky note and stuck it to the fridge. If it breaks, it teaches. If it teaches, it pays. The washing machine taught me a lot that winter. So did the pipes when they froze, and we learned we could thaw a house with a hairdryer and prayer. On Sundays, we let the morning be slow. Mama made pancakes, and the radio played songs that had once taught my parents how to dance in the kitchen. She swayed anyway, alone and dignified, while the batter bubbled. I learned grief has choreography: mix, pour, flip, breathe, serve, smile. Repeat. Years passed in small victories you could stack like folded linens. I grew taller. My voice found a lower register, a place to sit that sounded like steadiness. "Mama, let me drive in the grocery lot." "Hands at 10 and 2, she said, and that felt like vows. We stalled twice and laughed. Laughter in a half-empty car is money in a jar. You make a habit of it? High school gave me debate, where I learned to pull rooms toward me without raising my voice. It also gave me a job at the diner when Mr. Alvarez noticed my tray didn't wobble and my thank you sounded like it meant it. The night shift taught me America after midnight. Truckers with romances only the highway could understand. Nurses with soft eyes and tired feet. Men with hands like my father's from a distance. When one of them looked too much like him, the old ache rose and then fell back like a good dog when you call its name. I went to community college because money respects humility. We shared a car that coughed when it was cold. I studied mornings, worked afternoons, attended classes at night. In between, I started keeping a ledger called Hope. I wrote down everything that looked like a bridge, a new recipe that sold out, a coupon that doubled at Kroger, an A on a paper that needed no red. Then there was a boy. There usually is. His name was Nate. He had a laugh that felt like a front porch in June and a patience for my silences that seemed like kindness. He came from the kind of family that buys quality shoes. His mother wore perfume that smelled like opinion. "You're a hard worker," she told me over tea. "Hard work is good. Ambition is better." I heard the part she didn't say. Ambition belongs to families like ours. I folded my napkin until the seams made a pattern I could love. We married in a church whose windows threw colored light on the floor. Mama wore a blue dress she hemmed by hand the night before. I walked down the aisle with a bouquet of white roses and red knuckles because I donned tea like being stared at. People clapped. People like to clap for beginnings. They are cheaper than endings. The first year tasted like sweetness and fresh paint. We had a small apartment with windows that faced west. In the evenings, the sun slid in like an uninvited guest and made the dust beautiful. We built a table out of old doors. We ate dinner at it on plates that didn't match and told each other the truth. Then the truth got complicated. Nate started staying late at work. "Deadlines," he said, like time had reached out and grabbed him by the collar. I started finding receipts with names I didn't recognize. Money is fluent. It tells stories even when people won't. One night his phone lit up on the counter. The message said, "Tomorrow, same room." The room had a number. The number was honesty in neon. I rented the room next door. Okay? I sat on the bed and listened to the thin wall share more than it should. That is how I learned that hearing can be harder than seeing. That is also the night I decided revenge would never be a bonfire in my yard. It would be a mirror. I collected facts. I made copies. I wrote dates on envelopes. I made a file the size of a loaf of bread and took it to a lawyer who didn't need to teach me about budgets because I arrived with one in my hand. I served the papers at his promotion party. People clapped then too, but for different reasons. His mother's perfume smelled like panic. The settlement bought me time and the small house with the leaning fence and a kitchen that needed kindness. Mama moved in for a while and nailed our days together with recipes and prayers. I hung our rule on a new fridge. If it breaks, it teaches. There were other men. Some were decent. One, named Eli, was better than most. He had a patience like shade in August. He did not treat my strength as competition. He watched my children. Yes, there were 2 by then. My son August and my daughter Rose learned to stand on chairs and stir batter. He taught them to skip stones, not how to leave. We didn't marry. Not then. Maybe we should have. Maybe we did later. Life is made of those maybes that still let you sleep. My ex-mother-in-law tried to rename my daughter. Rosalind is so formal, she said. Rosie is better. I smiled that small Porchfalf smile my mama taught me and said, names are contracts. We sign ours. When she tried to shape my children with sugar and opinions, I bought the deed to our house and shaped our mornings instead. My children learned 3 rules early. We tell the truth, we keep receipts, and we do not let other people decide our weather. Work became more than a paycheck. It became a recipe. I turned Mama's biscuits into a little business. First I sold at the church bake sale, then the farmer's market. Then a stall that grew into a counter that grew into a room with 10 tables and a bell over the door. I called it Sugar and Screws because we built our life with both. People laughed at the name once, then they understood. They ate and their faces got soft in the good way. There was a man who stole my recipe, changed one ingredient, and called it new. He filmed himself in a pretty kitchen and said he learned biscuits from his grandmother in Georgia. My grandmother was named Louise, and she would have told him to return the bowl. I sent a letter with polite teeth. Then I sent a second letter with a watermark that a judge could see even if he forgot his glasses. The video disappeared. He posted an apology that sounded like cough syrup, but it was medicine enough. Revenge with documentation is more satisfying than shouting in the grocery aisle. There was an HOA president who tried to fine me for the ramp outside my shop. Not historical, he said, as if a wheelchair isn't a history of a different kind. The law had longer arms than his clipboard. He apologized at Christmas with a fruit basket. I took the oranges and left the papaya. Forgiveness is not a buffet. You do not have to take every dish. When August turned 17, he decided he knew things. He did. They were the wrong things. A girl with a glitter phone case told him he didn't TO chores because men were meant for bigger work. He tried to practice being a king in my kitchen. I handed him a trash bag and said, "The crown is out back." We fought, we slammed doors. He shouted words he couldn't afford. I did not match him, though my throat burned. Instead, I did what Mama did. I made a list. The list started with rent and ended with respect. He left to live with his father for a while. The house got quieter in ways I hated. Then one night, long and raw, he came home and put his keys on the hook like a confession. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were right. I didn't say I told you so. I made him eggs. That is the right kind of revenge for a son who comes back. Feed him and hand him a screwdriver." Somewhere in there, the phone rang with a voice I hadn't heard in decades. "It's Dad," he said of himself, like a stranger naming a landmark he hoped I remembered. He was in a VA hospital 2 counties over. "I don't want to die with this between us. There's a trick to being a daughter and a mother at the same time. You let the mother answer. We'll come tomorrow," I told him. We, not I, because my children needed to see what forgiveness looked like standing up. He was small in the bed, shrunk to the shape of his choices. His hands, once good with engines and stories, lay on the blanket like tools no one had put away properly. His hair was a forgiveness color, mostly white. "I got tired on the road," he said. "I got lost. Getting lost is a choice sometimes." I held his hand anyway. "We made it," I told him. "It wasn't pretty, but it held," he cried. I did not. Tears are not a test. Everyone gets to pick their own. Before he died, he told me there were letters. He had written and not mailed them because shame is a post office with short hours. "They're in a box," he said. "In the attic at the old house." The old house belonged to someone else by then. A family who planted sunflowers along the fence. I brought cinnamon rolls and the truth to their porch, and the new owner, a woman with forearms like hope, led me up a ladder into a hot square of dust. The box was there. Inside were letters on paper that had yellowed exactly as much as my patience. I read them at my kitchen table with the sugar jar beside me. And I cried for the first Tuesday and also for 100 small Wednesdays that never had a chance to happen. I buried him with a clean shirt and a note in his pocket that said 4 words. "We grew up, Dad." Later, when the ground settled and the headstone found its place among the other stones that marked the heavy work of loving people, I brought Boomer's old leash and wrapped it around flowers I couldn't afford. And I told the dirt about a girl who learned to fix fences and a woman who learned to fix days. There were other battles. A landlord tried to keep my deposit. I kept his license instead. A neighbor built a fence 2 feet over the line. The surveyor moved it back with a sound like justice snapping into place. A cousin borrowed money from Mama and called it help. I called it theft and made her sign a note she didn't think I knew how to write. People called me brash and bitter and bossy. They were right about one of those. I am bossy when it comes to budgets and beds and babies who need naps. Someone has to be. Rose grew into her name. She had the softness and the thorns. She wanted to sing, so I sewed dresses and said yes to expensive lessons and cheap meals. She moved to a city where strangers clap for art. She sent me voice memos that sounded like the world getting bigger. August learned engines and patience. He opened a garage and named it 10 and 2. Driving lessons for boys who think they're men, he joked. And sent his first month's profits to my shop because he is sentimental in ways he will deny. When the restaurant changed hands products of a good offer from a woman who had eaten at table for every Friday for 3 years, I kept the bell that hung over the door. It lives in my kitchen now. Sometimes I ring it before dinner just to call the past to the table and tell it may eat with us but not speak over the children. Eli came back around. He always had, but this time he stayed. We married in autumn under trees that understood how to let go. It wasn't a big wedding. We were past big weddings. My dress was cream and my shoes were sensible. The photographer caught us laughing at the cake because the cake leaned like it remembered gravity in our first kitchen. We danced to a song that had played on the radio in those early years and felt how grace is mostly memory that decided to be kind. There is a thing about revenge no one tells you. It should make you smaller if it is done wrong, and larger if it's done right. The right revenge is proof you built a life that didn't need the person who doubted it. The right revenge looks like a quiet porch at dusk, coffee in a chipped mug, a bill paid on time, knees that still work, and grandchildren who run up your steps yelling your name like a hymn. My grandchildren know me as Grandma Lou. They also know me as the woman who can unclog a sink with a wooden spoon and a good stare. They ask for stories. Children are born hungry for the past. Tonight they piled on the couch, knees and elbows, and the rustle of wrappers pilfered from the jar I pretend not to see. The youngest, June, curled into my side like a comma. Commas keep sentences going. I kissed her hair and began from the beginning. The day my daddy left, I told them. It was the day I grew up. I told them about the letter under the sugar jar, about the screws, about the fence that learned to stand straight. I told them about Mama's pancakes and the hairdryer thawing pipes like a lullaby. I told them about a boy who loved me the wrong way and a man who loved me the way a person loves a front porch by sitting still and staying. I told them about the court papers served with confetti and the settlement that bought our mornings. I told them about sugar and screws and how the bell sounded when someone opened the door to be fed. I told them about the letters in the attic and the note in the pocket and the grave that didn't. Tea make me angry because anger is rent you can stop paying. I told them about August leaving and coming back, about Rose singing and remembering to call on Tuesdays because Tuesdays are holy at our house. I told them about the HOA and the ramp and the law with long arms. I told them names are contracts and that you sign yours with deeds more than with ink. They listened like people at a window watching the first snow. Silence fell and caught on their lashes. The oldest, Sam, wiped at his eye like dust had the nerve. "Were you ever scared?" he asked. "Every day," I said. And I kept walking. That's the whole secret. Fear is weather. "You put on a coat. What did you learn?" Rose asked from the kitchen doorway. She had been pretending to do the dishes, but you can wash a plate while you're relisting that hard. I looked around the room, the bell on the wall, the photo of my mother with her arm through mine on the day we painted the kitchen white. The jar of screws on the shelf not for use anymore, but for remembering. I thought of the letter under sugar and the sugar under grief and the grief under everything that grew here anyway. I learned this, I said. I stood because some lessons want your whole height. The night pressed its face to the window. The youngest child's breath nodded against my sleeve. When someone leaves, I said, gather tools. When something breaks, let it teach you how to fix other things. Keep receipts for groceries, for kindness, for lies. Do not let anyone rename you. Names are contracts. You sign them daily. Love is work. Work is love. In cars that cost too much to repair and kitchens that need new paint, because joy is the interest on pain when you pay it back with living. Forgive when you can. When you can't, choose quiet. Quiet is a lawyer without a bill. I looked at August, my son who once wore a glint in his eyes like a borrowed knife and now wore patience like a belt. He nodded at me, pride and apology tied up in a knot that no longer needed pulling. I looked at Rose, who sang my childhood back to me in notes that held. She pressed her fingers to her lips the way she does when she wants her face to remember something forever. And one more thing, I added, a smile rising before the words. When men tell you they need to find themselves, tell them to check under the sugar jar. If they don't find what they want there, let them take the scenic route and bless their gas money. You've got a fence to straighten. We laughed. Even the house laughed. A low creak of old wood, happy to be leaned on by people who know its song. Later, when the children were in beds and the dishes air-dried like leaves, I carried the jar of screws to the porch. The night felt like a blessing that had learned my name. Eli came out with 2 mugs. We sat and listened to the crickets count without hurry. The moon hung there, unworried about its job. Across the yard, the fence stood straight in the dark. I kept one letter, I said, from the attic. The last one he wrote. Do you want to read it tonight? Eli asked. No, I said. I want to write one. I took a pen and a card from the small box beside the door where we keep stamps and tiny mercies. I dated it with today's date and addressed it to a child who didn't exist yet. The way you throw a rope to a dock no one has built but you reassure will be there when you arrive. I wrote, Dear, someday, on a Tuesday a long time ago, your great-grandma learned how to grow up. It wasn't pretty, but it held. When someone leaves, gather tools. When someone stays, let them. Keep the bell that rings when good things enter. Paint the kitchen white and don't apologize for joy that looks like a fresh wall. Forgive your father if you can. If you can't, feed the part of you that wants to forgive and wait for it to get strong. The day you're ready, it will tell you. And if life feels like a fence leaning the wrong way, there's a box of screws in the pantry. Love, Grandma. I sealed it and put it under the sugar jar. Not because it needed weighing down, but because everything important deserves a small ritual. We drank our coffee half decaf now, because age is smart and listened to the bell ring in my memory every time a stranger had walked into my shop and left with something bigger than biscuits. In the morning, we would make pancakes. The grandchildren would spill syrup and we'd let them. Rose would practice a song in the bedroom that used to be mine. August would fix the cabinet door that never liked to shut right. The dog would bark at a squirrel who never learned names. We would live. That is the best revenge. Before we went to bed, Eli touched my hand. You did it, he said. Grew up, he smiled. And then you taught the rest of us how. I turned off the porch light. The dark outside stayed where it belonged. Inside, the house kept our breaths, staggered and strong. I dreamed of a fence that never leaned, of a sugar jar with nothing under it but sugar, of a kitchen painted in a color that forgave everything because everything had been told the truth. In the morning, I woke to small feet and big voices. June climbed onto the bed and put her hand on my cheek the way a person checks if bread has cooled enough to slice. Grandma, she whispered, today is Tuesday. I smiled at the ceiling the way a woman smiles at a joke the world finally got right. Then today, I told her, pulling her close, we will grow up again.